This unlucky high schooler just became the latest target for Truck Coin, and when he finally wakes up, he's in a completely different world, a classic isekai setup. What he doesn't know yet is that he's got an insane hidden perk, the eternal youth. The story then opens in a medieval-style fantasy world, where a teenager named Ryou is lying on the floor of a tiny, run-down cottage. The place is empty except for a couple of old books and a knife sitting lonely on a table. Ryou shrugs them off, steps outside to breathe in the mountain air, and takes a look around. All he sees are endless peaks rising up everywhere. Curious, he lifts his hand and quietly mutters, "Water come forth," and like magic, a small pool of water springs up in his palm. Flashback to just a few days earlier, Ryou suddenly finds himself suspended in a bright, endless void. Confused, he's met by an angel who's quick to read his thoughts, assuring him this is not some afterlife checkpoint. The angel, who admits it's been ages since he's seen a guest, is both happy for the company and a bit bummed, since Ryou died after the infamous Truck Coin accident. Ryou, putting two and two together, realizes he's in line for reincarnation. He straight up asks the angel, who he decides to call Michael in his mind, what he's supposed to do in his next life. Michael tells him to just live however he likes. Ryou always wanted a slow, boring life, so after getting Michael's blessing, he gets ready to be reborn in a new, magical world called Phi. But before he goes, Michael breaks down the basics. Only 1/5 of people here can actually use magic, but Ryou is one of the lucky few especially gifted with water abilities. Since Ryou wanted a boring life, Michael sets him up in the forest of Rondo, far from crowds, with a small cottage and 2 months' worth of food stacked in a cold storage house. Inside the cottage, there are 2 handy guidebooks, one about the local plants, the other on the monsters he might run into. And when it comes to learning magic, Ryou remembers Michael's advice. All you need is imagination and practice. He's also safe from forest monsters for now, since Michael put up a barrier around the house. He then gives water magic another try, and with just a thought, he makes a perfect water ball appear in his hand. No chanting, just pure focus. And honestly, it's a pretty sweet setup for someone who just wanted to take it easy in another world. With a quick flick of his magic, Ryou then plugs up the bathtub with water. Honestly, it's a bit gross if you think about it, because the water technically comes straight from inside him. And to make things worse, it's freezing cold. Now he's got a new problem: how to heat it up. He tries the old school way, rubbing sticks together to spark a fire, but after multiple failed attempts, he just gives up and starts thinking if there's a magical shortcut. Remembering his chemistry classes from his past life, Ryou decides to separate hydrogen and oxygen from the water, but instead of making fire, the whole thing freezes up and turns into solid ice. Staring at the ice, Ryou has a light bulb moment. He uses the ice like a magnifying glass to focus sunlight, and with some luck, he manages to get fire going. Finally, he gets the water nice and hot and takes a long, relaxing bath. While soaking, his mind starts to clear, and he suddenly realizes he could have just used magic to heat the water in the first place by reversing the process he used to make ice. But he'll save that trick for next time, because for now, it's time to eat. During dinner, Ryou thinks about his limited food stash. He knows he'll need to start hunting soon, but the idea of going to the forest freaks him out. He's pretty sure that little knife Michael left him won't do much against monsters, so now he's got to unlock some offensive magic. The following morning, Ryou gets to work on his very first offensive spell, Water Ball. But the results are underwhelming. The attack does nothing to the tree he's aiming at. He tweaks the spell, making the ball thinner and sharper, almost like an arrow. After hours of trial and error, he finally manages to create a simple water jet, but even that can't scratch the tree. Not one to give up, Ryou spends the following day experimenting with ice magic instead. He carefully forms an ice crystal, but quickly learns that levitating ice is a lot tougher than water. Still, he keeps at it for hours and eventually figures out how to summon multiple ice crystals at once. But the only problem is that he still can't get them to actually launch at his target. After days of trial and error, Ryou finally gets the hang of forming ice crystals instantly, but still doesn't have the power to actually fire them as projectiles. Still, with his food running low, he makes do by using an ice crystal as a makeshift spearhead. He heads into the forest. By the riverbank, he spots some quartz and grins, knowing it'll be useful for making fire if he ever runs out of mana. While searching for medicinal herbs, Ryou gets ambushed by a monster, a lesser boar that clearly sees him as easy prey. The beast charges straight at him, and for a second, Ryou totally freezes, his feet glued to the ground. His isekai adventure nearly ends before it even gets started. But at the very last second, the fear of dying all over again kicks in, and he leaps out of the way. This time he thinks fast, using magic to freeze the ground and send the boar sliding. In the chaos, he summons several sharp icicles right in the boar's path, and the beast ends up impaled and finished off. Desperate times really do bring out the best in him, because Ryou manages to pull off some clutch water magic right when he needs it. Not a bad effort, but he's still got a long way to go. Back at home, Ryou cracks open the monster compendium and immediately learns that lesser boars are basically the weakest monsters around. He spends extra time flipping through the pages, trying to get ahead of anything he might run into next. When he reaches the section on dragons, the only advice is to run if you ever spot one, not that it'll help, since he'd almost definitely die anyway. Still, he's told to at least try to escape. Turning the page, he lands on a Kuma, an even worse nightmare. For this monster, the book doesn't bother giving any survival tips. All it says is to pray you never cross paths with one. The more he reads, the less helpful the book seems, but he powers through. You'd think his last hunt would keep him inside for good, but there's only so much time a guy can spend indoors. The next day, he pulls himself together and heads out again, ready for whatever this world might throw at him. And the day starts with optimism because Ryou discovers a tree loaded with fruit. The first bite is so good it almost makes up for all the stress from the day before, but his luck doesn't last. Out of nowhere, an assassin hawk swoops down and knocks him flat. It's immediately clear that this hawk is way stronger than he is, and there's no chance he can win in a straight fight. The hawk even uses invisible air magic, leaving Ryou completely defenseless. Remembering advice from his monster book, he tries to run, but there's no way he's outrunning a damn hawk. Realizing he can't escape, he turns to face the hawk. Using his ice magic, he manages to trap the bird. Thinking he's finally won, he gets closer, only for the hawk to break out injured but alive, one eye now damaged. Once the hawk realizes Ryou isn't as weak as he thought, it bolts. Ryou collapses in relief, complaining that this slow life he wanted is anything but slow. Trying to get home after the fight, Ryou realizes he's completely lost thanks to his mad dash from the hawk. As he stumbles through the forest, something freaks him out even more. A headless dullahan with smoke pouring from its neck, calmly tending to its horse. But somehow, Ryou eventually finds his way back home. As days pass, he keeps training and leveling up his skills. From fighting monsters to fishing, his water magic gets so strong he can slice through mountains with it. He keeps pushing himself to get tougher, and slowly he's starting to adjust to this new life. But every night he returns to the same spot where he found the dullahan, challenging it over and over, not to win, but maybe just to grow stronger. There's no info about dullahans in his monster compendium, so he wonders if it's not a monster at all, or if it's just not in the beginner's guide. After another failed duel, Ryou admits the only reason he keeps coming back is because it feels like the dullahan is actually helping him get stronger. One night, he watches as the dullahan creates an ice sword, holding out toward him as if offering a gift. Taking the hint, Ryou accepts the sword, and with that, the dullahan leaves him in peace. For the next several days, or maybe even weeks, Ryou finally enjoys a stretch of calm, but the peace doesn't last long. One day, while training, he spots a familiar figure. The vengeful hawk is back. He instantly notices it's missing an eye, so there's no doubt it's the same bird he fought before. But now it's turned completely black and it looks much bigger than last time, which means it's evolved. The hawk charges at him, faster and stronger than ever. Ryou instantly calls up his 5-layer ice wall, but the hawk smashes through it like it's nothing, so he quickly summons a 10-layer ice wall, but the bird breaks that down too. Desperate, Ryou attacks with multiple ice crystals, but the hawk uses some kind of magic negation to wipe them out and closes in on him. Then suddenly, Ryou senses something in the air, so he leaps aside, and at this moment, Ryou's stick gets reduced to ashes by a surprise lightning attack. So in the heat of the moment, he grabs the sword he got from the dullahan and goes after the hawk. This time, the sword actually works. He lands a hit, forcing the hawk back, but it isn't done yet. The bird lunges at him again, and with a final thrust, Ryou pierces it with the blade and the hawk collapses. Ryou approaches the fallen bird, admitting that it's one of the most persistent creatures he's ever met. He realizes that the hawk evolved just for this rematch, and as a sign of respect, he lets it die by his hand. Removing the sword, he watches as the hawk finally passes away. Ryou continues his journey, completely unaware that a dragon is nearby. Suddenly, a dragon appears and starts speaking to him, and Ryou is stunned that he can understand a dragon's voice. The dragon, glad to have his telepathy working again, asks Ryou if he's seen an evolved hawk. Ryou explains he just killed one. The dragon is surprised that a human could defeat it, so Ryou shows him the sword. Instantly, the dragon recognizes it as the sword of the Fairy King and asks what Ryou did to deserve it, but Ryou has no idea. With the dragon's curiosity satisfied, Ryou takes his turn asking questions. The two chat until late before the dragon announces he needs to leave. But before parting ways, Ryou introduces himself and the dragon shares his name, Lewin. Things are actually going pretty well for Ryou in this new world, so well that the angel who reincarnated him checks his heavenly records again and realizes he missed something huge. Ryou has a secret ability that the angel never noticed before, the power of eternal youth. Meanwhile, down by the riverbank, we see a mysterious boy with red hair lying in the sand next to a wrecked boat. Later, Ryou suddenly gets an intense craving for seafood, so he casually strolls down to the beach. But the moment he arrives, his eyes widen in shock at the massive shipwreck sprawled out before him. He rushes forward, quickly noticing a man lying next to the busted-up vessel. Ryou kneels to check on him, only to find out the poor bastard's already kicked the bucket. But then he hears a faint groan nearby, and excitement floods through him because this is the first living human he's encountered since arriving in this world. The survivor named Abel recalls fragmented memories of a massive octopus-like monster attacking his ship during a violent storm, causing him to plunge into the sea. But when Abel wakes up, he's surprised as hell to find himself chilling in some stranger's house. Confused but grateful he's alive, he quickly bolts upright, panicking as he searches for other survivors. When Abel staggers outside, he's even more confused, realizing he has absolutely no clue where the hell he is. Just then, Ryou appears quietly behind him, startling Abel because despite being a seasoned warrior, he couldn't sense Ryou's presence at all, and he is also equally stunned by Ryou's bizarre fashion sense, though he decides to politely avoid mentioning it for now. Instead, he introduces himself properly and thanks Ryou for saving him. Ryou awkwardly replies that Abel was the only guy still breathing and the rest were already fish food when he got there. Abel quickly assures him not to stress about it, casually revealing those guys were just sketchy smugglers anyway, but before he can say more, his stomach interrupts him with a loud growl. Laughing awkwardly, Ryou suggests they continue the chat over some food. Abel follows him inside, but nosy-ass Abel immediately brings up Ryou's bizarre clothing. Ryou explains that he simply has no other clothing and lacks materials to craft new ones. So Abel casually advises him to just buy some, but immediately feels awkward, thinking Ryou might be too poor to afford new clothes. But Ryou quickly eases Abel's guilt trip by explaining he's literally the only human living in this godforsaken place, so there's nobody to sell him clothes anyway. Abel then gets curious, asking if Ryou hunts to get his grub. Ryou casually nods yes, and Abel curiously asks if he uses that dinky little knife he's got. With a smirk, Ryou demonstrates his impressive water magic, mentioning that magic is his primary method for hunting. Abel is astonished, revealing that only about half the world's population can use magic, and he himself unfortunately belongs to the half that can't. This surprises Ryou because the angel had told him that just 20% of people possess magical abilities. Afterward, Abel requests that Ryou take him down to the shore as there's something important he needs to verify. On their way down to the beach, Abel suddenly tries to act all heroic, telling Ryou to stay behind him if they encounter any danger. Ryou calmly replies that it's not necessary, but Abel insists, clearly not wanting to feel like some helpless damsel in distress. Ryou allows him to do as he wishes, and soon they reach the wrecked ship, but all the bodies have mysteriously vanished. Abel figures either the monsters or the sea already took care of them, then awkwardly thanks Ryou again, knowing his ass would have met the same fate without him. Abel grumbles a bit, mentioning that he couldn't find whatever the hell he was looking for and says that right now his priority is meeting back up with his crew. Problem is, the storm knocked his ship far south to God knows where, leaving him completely unsure about which way to go next. Then Abel suddenly perks up, turning to Ryou and casually asking if he'd like to tag along. Ryou is surprised by this sudden invitation, and Abel quickly explains that he could use Ryou's help to find his way back, and in return, Abel could hook Ryou up with a decent job in the city, one where he might not have to dress like Mockley anymore. After thinking it through, Ryou eventually agrees to guide Abel back. Later that evening, Ryou stands quietly looking at the garden he's painstakingly grown, feeling a strange pang of sadness at the thought of leaving all his hard work behind. That night, he tells Abel he's heading out to say goodbye to someone important. Abel raises an eyebrow, obviously curious who the hell Ryou could be meeting in the middle of nowhere, but decides not to pry, probably sensing it's none of his damn business. Afterward, Ryou walks over to the lake to find the headless knight, standing by the quiet waters. He announces he's leaving the forest for a long time. He thanks the knight for all the training, then dramatically whips out his knife, promising to go all out one last time. Without a word, obviously since the dude has no head, the knight draws his sword, ready to throw down. Ryou charges in hard, delivering blow after blow like he's in the final scene of some epic anime fight, driving the knight backward relentlessly. Eventually, Ryou exhausts himself, panting heavily as the knight silently retreats into the lake again. Catching his breath, Ryou offers one final heartfelt thank you, but of course the knight keeps silent. Just as Ryou is about to leave, the knight unexpectedly turns around and magically summons a badass armored suit straight out of the water, apparently his parting gift. Ryou gets embarrassingly sentimental at the gesture, choking out another thank you before heading back home. The following day, Ryou and Abel gear up to set out on their journey. As they get ready, Ryou finds himself surprisingly nostalgic about leaving the isolated place he's called home for so long. Soon after, they encounter a wild boar in the forest, and Abel quickly asks Ryou to leave it to him. He rushes toward the boar with his sword drawn, swiftly unleashing a combat skill that instantly turns the poor animal into a shish kebab. Amazed, Ryou asks what exactly combat skills are, and Abel explains that they're special techniques used by those who fight using weapons. That night, they camp inside a large hollow tree, and the next morning they continue their journey through the forest. As they approach a swamp, they spot several lizardmen roaming around. Abel decides it's best to avoid them and suggests changing their route, since lizardmen can be quite strong opponents. But even after they shift their path, Ryou senses the creatures still pursuing them from behind. Abel immediately prepares to fight, but Ryou warns him that there are too many enemies this time, insisting he'll use his magic as well. Abel doubts Ryou can fight without his staff, but he's left stunned when Ryou instantly blasts 4 lizardmen at once with icicle lances. After the battle ends, Abel questions Ryou about the spell he just cast. Ryou casually replies that it was just a regular icicle lance, but Abel insists his wind mage friends are limited to casting only 1 attack at a time, while Ryou effortlessly summoned 4 icicles simultaneously. Ryou shrugs it off, suggesting maybe it's just a limitation of wind magic because it's totally normal for water magic. Abel decides not to dwell on it too much, suggesting they continue their journey. But before moving forward, Ryou creates 2 ice glasses and magically fills them with water. Abel notices Ryou used a different incantation this time, but Ryou quickly covers it up by saying that he must have misheard him earlier. As they keep traveling, Abel hands Ryou a coin, and Ryou excitedly claims this is the first time he's ever seen actual money. Abel is speechless, as he always assumed Ryou was poor but never imagined he was that poor. He then begins explaining to Ryou about the 3 major nations within the central provinces: the Kingdom of Nightly, the Debui Empire, and the Handaliu Federation. Ryou immediately starts roasting the Debui Empire just because he finds its name ridiculous. And while he continues joking about the Empire's absurd name, they reach a wide clearing. But just then, a rock near them moves on its own, startling both of them, so Abel quickly draws his sword and slices it neatly in half, and Ryou swiftly conjures a water barrier to deflect the barrage of flying stones. Abel realizes with dread they've accidentally wandered into a nest of rock golems. Confused, Ryou wonders aloud if golems aren't supposed to be more humanoid-shaped, but Abel decides they've got bigger problems to handle first. Charging forward, Abel punches a hole straight through the nearest golem, but to his surprise, the golem instantly regenerates, returning fire immediately. Abel swiftly retreats, grimacing, and warns Ryou that conventional attacks won't do much against these things. However, Ryou suddenly gets a clever idea. Summoning a massive block of ice midair, he casually drops it right on top of the golems, crushing them flat. Abel's jaw nearly hits the ground in shock, having never witnessed such a ridiculously effective spell before. Ryou, thoroughly pleased with himself, repeats the ice block maneuver a few more times, effortlessly clearing out the rest of the golems. After the dust settles, they find one particularly special rock golem embedded with a large magic stone, and Abel excitedly notes that such a stone would fetch a great price. Ryou wistfully says he'd love to grab the magic stones from the other golems too, but sighs dramatically, admitting he's either too lazy or honestly too clueless to melt all the ice again. Continuing their journey, they soon stumble upon an enormous crocodile hippo creature sprawled out before them. Abel gasps in awe, calling it a behemoth, a ridiculously rare and powerful monster he's only heard legends about. Ryou eagerly asks if they should hunt it, but Abel quickly shakes his head, insisting they don't stand a chance. Just then, a group of wyverns swoop down from above, capturing Ryou's attention immediately. He's excited to witness an epic monster showdown. Moments later, the wyverns waste no time launching magical rocks at the behemoth, but the beast simply roars defiantly, canceling out their magic and sending the wyverns tumbling to the ground. Impressed, Ryou casually tells Abel that the massive creature likely has some sort of magic cancellation skill. Later that night, over dinner, Abel curiously asks Ryou about the magic cancellation skill, since he'd only heard of certain dungeon traps having such a powerful ability. Ryou's eyes sparkle at the mention of dungeons, excitedly demanding to know more. Abel casually mentions there's a dungeon in the city of Loon exactly where they're heading. Ryou dramatically loses it, annoyed that Abel didn't bother mentioning something so crucial earlier, and playfully interrogates him about any other secrets he might be hiding. Abel awkwardly asks if Ryou at least knows about dwarves and elves, but Ryou urges him to fill in the details anyway. After a few days, they finally reach a sprawling mountain range, and Ryou confidently says they'll find some human settlement just beyond those mountains. Abel raises an eyebrow skeptically, asking how Ryou can be so damn sure. Ryou briefly considers telling Abel about that dragon he casually chatted with, who conveniently spilled all the secrets of this world, but decides against it, and he settles instead on dramatically replying that it's knowledge beyond human comprehension. Just as Abel's about to call him out on his cryptic nonsense, they suddenly hear a strange noise nearby. Instantly, they both tense up, weapons at the ready. Seconds later, a massive monster, a freaking griffin, soars down from the sky straight toward them, prompting both boys to freak out spectacularly. Abel immediately goes into full panic mode, his mind racing with ways they're about to become bird food, but Ryou swiftly saves their skins by tossing a hefty chunk of meat high into the air. Abel quickly copies him, hurling another chunk skyward, so the griffin eagerly snatches both pieces mid-flight and casually flies away, clearly uninterested in human-flavored snacks. After a tense pause, they both exhale deeply, relieved that they're not dinner tonight, and they admit shakily that picking a fight with something like that would have ended terribly. As they continue onward, Abel starts rambling about how nobody's even seen a behemoth or a griffin in over a century, suggesting the tall mountains might have kept these powerful creatures from reaching populated areas. That reminds Ryou that the wyverns they saw earlier came from the north, meaning their nest must be nearby. As usual, Ryou's instincts are spot on, as they soon stumble upon a small group of wyverns munching on some unfortunate monster. Ryou eagerly suggests fighting them, but Abel quickly shuts him down, warning him that it typically takes at least 20 experienced adventurers to handle creatures as tough as wyverns. Ryou shrugs calmly, reminding Abel they'll inevitably have to face strong monsters eventually. Then with a mischievous smile, Ryou asks if pinning them to the ground would make things easier for Abel. Abel cautiously agrees, saying if they're grounded, he can handle one or two up close. Without hesitation, Ryou dramatically steps forward, loudly chanting a deliberately exaggerated fake spell before casually summoning 4 icicles that stab through the wyvern's wings, pinning them in place. Abel doesn't waste the opportunity and swiftly leaps forward, ending their misery. But before they can celebrate, 2 more wyverns swoop in aggressively. This time, Ryou instantly summons more icicles, but without bothering with any flashy chanting. Abel notices immediately, casting a suspicious glance at Ryou, but decides to save the questions for later. After dispatching the new threats, they gather the magic stones from the defeated wyverns and continue their journey northward. Soon enough, the two finally make it past the mountains, emerging onto the peaceful scenery of the Green Hills. Abel is impressed they not only fought wyverns, but gathered a ton of magic stones that'll bring in a pretty good payday when they arrive in the Empire. This suddenly makes Ryou curious, and he asks exactly which country they're heading towards, hoping it's literally anywhere but the Debui Empire. Abel reassures him, saying that the Debui Empire is actually farther north, and Ryou lets out a relieved sigh. Seeing Ryou react like that, Abel gets confused and asks if he's got some kind of personal beef with the Empire. Ryou says he doesn't have anything against his people, but he finds the name Debui so painfully cringe that he'd rather just avoid it altogether. Abel gives him a weird look, finding this logic bizarre as hell. Just then, Ryou notices a road far ahead, and Abel quickly realizes that since it runs east to west, the mountains they cross might not have been ordinary at all. But when Ryou asks what's on his mind, Abel just waves him off, saying it's nothing and mentions that the road probably leads to a town. Ryou immediately brightens up, thrilled at the thought of finally sleeping in an actual bed, and Abel tells him that he should also try out the local food there. By nightfall, they reach the town and settle down in an inn for dinner. While they're eating, Abel suggests that Ryou should register with the Adventurers Guild, explaining that a guild card doubles as an ID and lets him avoid taxes whenever he enters a new city. He reminds Ryou that he had to pay a silver coin out of his own pocket to cover for him at the town entrance. Ryou immediately starts teasing Abel, asking if he's really keeping tabs on every single coin he spends helping out a friend. Abel cringes slightly at Ryou's cheap attempt to shame him, but he pushes through anyway, pointing out another benefit. If Ryou joins the Adventurers Guild, he can sell magic stones and monster materials directly to the guild at a great price. He further explains that only alchemists know how to use those materials effectively, and Ryou is instantly interested, wanting to learn more. Before he can dive into 1,000 questions, though, their waitress arrives with dinner, and Ryou's jaw drops when he sees a plate of curry. He struggles to comprehend how curry could possibly exist here already. After all, even in the most cliché isekai anime, the main character usually has to travel far and wide, struggling desperately to recreate that perfect taste of home. Ryou had kind of been looking forward to his own curry quest, but one bite proves that this curry is exactly like the one he enjoyed back in Japan. Completely overwhelmed by nostalgia and deliciousness, Ryou polishes off the entire plate in seconds and immediately orders another round. The next morning, Ryou is still hyped up about the curry he ate last night and playfully accuses Abel of keeping yet another juicy secret from him. Abel freaks out a little, confused about what secret Ryou is talking about this time, but Ryou just laughs it off, saying Abel needs to spill all the tea on any local dessert spots he might have overlooked. Abel quickly turns away, awkwardly admitting he's not into sweets, and Ryou just stares after him, wondering why he's acting so weird. They hit the road again and eventually arrive at the town of Loon, a place surrounded by endless fields of wheat. At the town gate, they're greeted by Nimmer, one of the guards who's completely stunned when he recognizes Abel. Apparently, Abel had been reported missing several months ago, so Nimmer is overjoyed to see him back safe and sound, and he warmly thanks Ryou for helping his buddy return home. Nimmer enthusiastically shakes Ryou's hand and then catches up on old times with Abel. Once inside town, Abel suggests they head directly to the Adventurers Guild, explaining that if he's there to vouch for Ryou, he can immediately skip from newbie F rank to D rank upon registration. Usually, newbies start at the bottom, but having someone ranked B or higher to back you up can speed up the process significantly. As soon as they enter the guild, everyone is shocked and thrilled to see Abel again. People crowd around him like he's some kind of hometown hero, and Ryou watches happily, glad to see Abel has so many good friends here. Deciding to give Abel some space to enjoy his moment, Ryou steps outside for some air. When he starts walking, Ryou suddenly runs into an elf girl, and he's instantly charmed by her graceful features and pointy ears. Strangely, the elf girl is just as intrigued by Ryou, staring at him in shock because of the unusual coat he's wearing. She quickly recognizes it as the Fairy King's own robe, mentioning that the Fairy King must really like Ryou to have given him such a rare gift. Completely baffled by her words, Ryou tries to figure out what's going on, but before he can ask any questions, the elf apologizes, saying she's in a hurry. She adds that she hopes they'll meet again soon, and then hurries off. Ryou stands there completely bewildered, still trying to process what just happened, when Abel comes outside looking for him. Abel drags him back inside the guild, introducing Ryou to all of his friends as the guy who saved his life. Everyone starts thanking Ryou, showering him with praise and appreciation, and he decides that getting all this positive attention feels pretty damn good. Thereafter, Abel takes Ryou straight up to the reception desk, confidently telling the receptionist that he wants Ryou to be registered as a D-rank adventurer based on his recommendation. The receptionist is visibly stunned, pointing out that Abel and his team have never endorsed anyone before. Abel simply smiles, explaining that Ryou is an exceptional case. The receptionist politely insists that Ryou still needs to pass a strength evaluation before officially ranking up, so Abel asks to speak directly with Guildmaster Hugh about it. She tells them to wait for a bit, and shortly afterward, Hugh bursts into the room dramatically, overjoyed after hearing Abel is back. Abel introduces Ryou to the Guildmaster, requesting that Ryou be given the rank-up test. Hugh mentions they'll need proof of Ryou's strength for that, and Abel casually replies that Ryou is even stronger than himself, leaving the Guildmaster in total disbelief. Abel quickly backs up his claim by pulling out all the magic stones they gather from the wyverns, and Hugh instantly freaks out. He exclaims that the sheer quantity of stones indicates they've taken down enough wyverns to threaten an entire country. Abel calmly reassures him that there's no danger of an attack since they hunted the wyverns south of the Malefic Mountains. Curious, Ryou wonders if the name Malefic Mountains has some special meaning, prompting Hugh to explain that no one in recorded history has safely crossed them. Hugh emphasizes that the mountains are so notoriously dangerous even elite adventurers wouldn't risk exploring there without an extremely important damn reason. He's astonished that Ryou and Abel are now the first to accomplish such an impossible accomplishment, immediately agreeing to promote Ryou without further testing. Suddenly, Abel's party members burst into the room, overcome with emotion after thinking they'd never see Abel alive again. Seeing this heartfelt reunion, Hugh decides it's best to give them some space and offers to guide Ryou outside to finalize his registration. As Ryou turns to leave, Abel quickly calls out, asking him to wait at the reception desk once he's done, mentioning he wants to show Ryou someplace special. Thereafter, Hugh leads Ryou towards his office, explaining that Abel's group, known as the Crimson Sword, is among the strongest and most respected adventurer parties in town. Ryou doesn't find that surprising at all, though he's still unsure if he truly deserves the jump straight to D rank. Seeing this, Hugh reassures him by saying that while Abel is indeed strong, defeating even a single wyvern alone is beyond his abilities, which makes it clear to him that Ryou played a major role in taking down the wyverns. Just then, the receptionist walks into the office carrying the equipment needed for Ryou's formal registration. Hugh excuses himself immediately, saying he has piles of paperwork waiting, leaving Ryou in her hands. The receptionist cheerfully introduces herself as Mina, then begins asking Ryou the standard registration questions. She explains that he can use the guild lodgings for up to 300 days from registration, after which he'll have to find a place of his own. Next, she tells him about a dungeon exploration training course the guild offers to new adventurers. Ryou immediately expresses his interest in joining the course, and Nina tells him to come to the meeting hall 2 days from now at precisely 9 a.m. and Ryou is momentarily stunned that this world even has clocks. Afterwards, Nina moves on to complete the actual registration. She instructs Ryou to place his hand on the crystal device on the table. When he does, the device scans and transfers his biometrics onto a metallic plate resting atop it, turning it into his official guild card. Nina congratulates Ryou, formally welcoming him as a registered adventurer, and then both of them step outside the office. Not long afterward, Abel takes Ryou out to explore the town, mentioning that he'd like to buy him some new clothes and a staff as payment for escorting him safely to his hometown. Ryou happily accepts the clothes but questions why he would need a staff. Abel points out that magicians always use staves to cast spells, but Ryou casually tells him he can use magic perfectly fine without one. He also explains that whenever he fights up close, he prefers using a sword anyway, so a staff would be pretty pointless for him. Abel is caught off guard by this, and he's even more shocked when Ryou casually reveals the small knife he carries around actually serves as his sword. Setting all that aside, Ryou mentions that more than equipment, what he really needs right now is some solid information about how things work in this world. Shortly after that, Ryou learns that this world uses the exact same measurement of time as Earth: hours, days, weeks, months, and even the metric system. It now clicks in his mind that someone from Earth must have landed here a long time ago and influenced the way things operate, explaining all the familiar stuff he's come across. Right then, Abel returns from the store after paying for all the stuff Ryou picked out, cheerfully informing him that the best part of the day is still ahead. Abel then guides Ryou to a large inn where all his friends from the guild are gathered, throwing a lively celebration for Abel's safe return. They party until late, leaving Ryou exhausted, so that by the next morning, Nina has to drag him out of bed to show him his lodgings. She brings him to a room where two other fresh adventurers are already settling in. The blonde guy introduces himself as Ito, and the brown-haired guy as Nils. Both greet Ryou warmly, and once Nina leaves, Nils immediately starts gushing about how much he likes her and how cute she is. Ito quickly shuts him down, reminding him that Nina is way out of his league. Ito then casually chats with Ryou, giving him a quick rundown on life at the guild dorms. Moments later, Nina returns again, this time bringing along another nervous-looking newbie named Ammon. Curious about his youthful appearance, the others ask his age. Ammon shyly reveals he just turned 16, but with both parents recently deceased, he's decided to earn a living as an adventurer. Nina gently asks them to make Ammon feel welcome, then reminds Ryou and Ammon to join her at the meeting hall the next morning for their dungeon exploration training. At the same time, Abel excitedly recounts to his party all the incredible things he saw Ryou do, using magic effortlessly without his staff, skewering wyverns with icicles, and even crushing rock golems with gigantic ice blocks. Lynn, the skeptical member of the group, dismisses Abel's stories as impossible, arguing that magic simply doesn't work that way due to limitations like range and distance, but Abel firmly insists that everything he said was true. But then another party member named Rhea comments thoughtfully that there's only one mage who has ever been rumored to wield magic of such scale, and he is the legendary Inferno magician. But since nobody has actually witnessed his insane magic firsthand, his feats remain nothing more than rumors. This leads to a brief moment of worry. If Ryou really is that powerful, what would happen if he turns against them, or worse, sides with the Debui Empire? But Abel confidently reassures them that the Debui Empire won't be an issue, given how passionately Ryou dislikes its shit name. Meanwhile, at the lodging, Ryou is cracking jokes and laughing along with his roommates, amazed at how drastically different his life has suddenly become. A few days later, Ryou and Ammon finally wrap up their speedrun dungeon exploration class for rookies, and their instructor announces that they'll venture into the dungeon's first floor this afternoon. Ammon visibly freaks out about his first dungeon experience, but Ryou casually tells him to calm the hell down, because if he stresses out now, he'll just end up exhausted before even stepping inside. The instructor then asks the group if anyone's got any burning questions, and Ryou immediately asks whether it's possible to teleport directly to the floors they already cleared. The instructor is genuinely impressed by this question, since usually only veteran adventurers would even think to ask something like that. He explains that there are certain dungeons further south where adventurers can conveniently warp between checkpoints, but unfortunately, the Loon Dungeon doesn't have any cool tricks like that. Afterwards, the instructor escorts the newbies directly to the dungeon, located right in the city's heart. He reveals that the city itself was literally built around the dungeon, adding that every several years the monster count inside spikes dramatically, sometimes even pushing them above ground. He explains how the massive walls around the dungeon protect ordinary folks from monster rampages, but then quickly reassures the nervous newbies there's currently zero risk of any major monster outbreak happening anytime soon. Not long after, they finally reach the beginner-friendly first floor of the dungeon, which fortunately doesn't house any particularly fierce creatures. The instructor tells everyone they're welcome to explore freely, but insists they stick close to the entrance. Ryou pairs up with Amon, and almost immediately, Ryou senses something approaching. He tells Amon to ready himself for a strike while he handles immobilizing their enemy, and Amon anxiously pulls out his sword. Moments later, a monster ant shows up, and Ryou instantly recognizes it from his monster textbook as a soldier ant. He instructs Amon to aim right at its neck, while he pins it down using ice spears. Ryou flawlessly locks the monster to the ground, letting Amon cleanly slice its head off, earning himself his first kill. Amon is totally hyped about this victory, and Ryou quickly retrieves the ant's magic stone as proof of their first successful hunt together. Later that evening, they're eating dinner alongside their roommates who insist on celebrating their first successful dungeon raid. The roommates are genuinely impressed that the pair managed to defeat a soldier ant on their first trip, but Amon modestly insists he only finished off the ant after Ryou had it firmly restrained. He excitedly mentions that he can't wait to return to the dungeon tomorrow, although he's admittedly nervous about trying to go solo. Ryou volunteers to tag along since he's also eager to explore the dungeon to the third floor because he finds it suspicious as hell that they encounter a stronger monster from a deeper level wandering around on the first floor. After all, the instructor made that sound unusual. Ito chimes in, mentioning he's heard recent rumors of soldier ants appearing even up near the first and second floors, and none of the boys can figure out why the heck that's happening. At that moment, Abel walks in casually and explains it's because soldier ants can tunnel their way upward. Mills and Ito absolutely lose their shit when they realize the town's most badass adventurer just showed up in front of them. Ryou, as always, casually greets his friend without giving a damn about his celebrity status, prompting Abel to jokingly ask the guys to keep an eye on Ryou since he completely lacks common sense. Nils immediately jumps up, saluting Abel excitedly and declaring that he's his biggest fan. He passionately announces his dream of becoming a legendary adventurer just like Abel one day, asking eagerly if he could shake his golden hand. Abel happily grants him the handshake, gently advising Nils to chase his dream, but never forget that survival always comes first. Ryou then bluntly asks Abel what he's doing hanging around here this late, and Abel replies that he just returned from his latest mission. Before he can say anything else, Abel's party suddenly storms in. The girls are clearly pissed that Abel came here instead of heading straight to the guildmaster for a mission report. Abel quickly tries explaining he was merely helping out some newbie adventurers who needed his advice, but Lynn isn't having any of it and immediately tells Warren to haul him away. Warren lifts Abel onto his back effortlessly as Abel starts whining like a toddler. Meanwhile, Lynn suddenly stares daggers at Ryou with obvious jealousy. Ryou awkwardly asks her what the hell she wants, causing the priestess Ria to quickly snap Lynn out of her daze and apologize to Ryou for their rude interruption. As the group leaves, Ito and Nils fanboy uncontrollably over them, but Ryou genuinely can't comprehend what's so damn impressive about that crew of clowns. At the same time, Ria gently scolds Lynn for openly glaring at Ryou, but Lynn insists she was just curious because Abel keeps bragging non-stop about Ryou's magic. Ria admits she's also curious to see Ryou's true abilities, but Abel reassures them they'll get to witness it firsthand soon enough. The following day, Ryou and Amon return to the dungeon, this time encountering a pack of monster dogs. Ryou once again pins the beasts down effortlessly with his ice spears, while Amon impressively displays his sword skills by taking out a couple of the monsters himself. Afterwards, during a brief break, Ryou comments that Amon's swordsmanship reminds him strangely of Abel's style. Amon clarifies that his sword instructor was some old geezer named Kiro, who learned swordsmanship from a prestigious academy back in the capital. So Ryou immediately assumes Abel must have trained under the same academy and sees genuine potential in Amon, believing he could grow into an incredibly powerful swordsman one day. Amon is impressed that Ryou knows so much about swordsmanship despite being primarily a mage. Ryou casually explains that he trained under a mentor for a bit but ultimately came up with his own fighting style. He then comments that Amon's current form seems pretty taxing physically, though it's also super reliable, and suggests he just needs to boost his endurance. Ryou mentions that Abel always used to wake up at the crack of dawn to practice his sword forms during their travels, highlighting that even naturally gifted people have to bust their asses training. Amon feels pumped up hearing that and swears he'll put in extra effort to become stronger, which pleases Ryou. The following morning, Ryou drops by the library and is taken aback by how freaking massive it is. He asks the librarian to point him to the alchemy books, and she leads him to shelves filled with beginner manuals. The sheer number of choices overwhelms him, so Ryou decides he needs some air to clear his mind. But just as he does, everything goes pitch black as a full-on solar eclipse darkens the entire city, and he gawks in amazement at the sky. Barely a moment later, he realizes something weird as hell just happened. Everyone around him is suddenly gone, leaving him totally alone in an eerie, unsettling atmosphere. Right then, he feels something dangerous coming at him from behind. Instinctively, he spins around, summoning a thick ice barrier just in time to deflect an incredibly powerful blast of fire. Shocked, he wonders who the hell just tried to roast his ass, and then spots a terrifyingly hot demon lady strolling towards him like she stepped straight out of a Hollywood action movie. She smirks, amused to find a random human trapped in her domain, clearly looking forward to messing him up. Ryou instantly recognizes that he's dealing with an actual demon now, and he's absolutely certain she's by far the strongest opponent he's encountered since arriving in this world. He considers fleeing for a second, but realizes there's no freaking way he'll escape from this bizarre dimension no matter how hard he tries. Gritting his teeth, he decides his only option is to fight. Without hesitation, he summons a bunch of ice barriers around himself just before the demon woman unleashes another hellish wave of flames. His shields manage to hold back the intense blaze, but the demon suddenly switches tactics, firing an invisible bullet of wind that effortlessly punches through Ryou's ice walls, only to bounce harmlessly off his robe. The hot demon can't believe her eyes, baffled at how some human-made robe could stop her attack. But on a closer look, she realizes Ryou's cloak is actually the Fairy King's robe. Acknowledging he must be a mage of significant skill and power to possess such rare gear and survive her attacks, she decides she'll simply cut him down the old-fashioned way with her sword rather than relying on magic. Ryou also summons his ice blade to meet the demon's strike head-on, immediately shifting into a defensive stance as the fierce woman relentlessly pushes him back. She's incredibly quick, forcing him into a desperate dodge as a lethal slash narrowly misses his face. Seeing his chance, he retaliates by launching a storm of frozen spears at her, but the demon easily dances around every projectile, failing to notice the solar eclipse slowly fading away as she screws around enjoying herself. At the same time, Ryou figures out she's boosting her speed using wind magic, and right then she lunges straight at him for a decisive blow. Ryou blocks her strikes surprisingly easily, because while she's speedy, her swordsmanship doesn't even come close to the hellish training sessions he endured under that headless knight. The demon pauses in shock, genuinely impressed, and demands to know who the hell he is to possess not only the Fairy King's cloak, but also his blade. Frustrated, she conjures a blazing fireball to incinerate him, but Ryou effortlessly cancels it out with a well-timed icicle spear. This royally pisses her off, and the demon decides to put an end to him fast, realizing he'll become a real threat if the fight drags out. She unleashes an aggressive onslaught, but Ryou remains composed, smoothly blocking her frenzied attacks. He spots an opening and counters fiercely, knocking the demon off balance. Immediately seizing the advantage, Ryou unleashes a barrage of sharpened ice spikes, aiming to finish her off. The demoness quickly surrounds herself in scorching flames, melting away the ice spears before they reach her. But as Ryu's relentless assault intensifies, she is forced to summon thick stone walls as extra protection. Ryou, however, adapts on the fly, switching tactics to piercing high-pressure jets of water that slice effortlessly through the rocky barriers, slashing her several times. She is stunned that his attacks could actually hurt her, but luckily Ryou had been striking blindly due to the thick cloud of smoke obscuring his vision. Seizing his opportunity, Ryou rushes in to deliver the killing blow, but the demon desperately leaps forward to intercept his strike. As their blades violently clash midair, Ryou is startled to see the demon's wounds rapidly closing up and healing right before his eyes. His momentary distraction gives her the opening she needs to land a devastating hit, slamming him hard into a nearby building. As she prepares to finish him off for good, she feels droplets of water hitting her skin. Confused, she glances upwards just as a scalding hot raindrop strikes her cheek, burning hotter than freaking boiling water. She screams out in agony and instantly encases herself in a protective stone cocoon, desperately waiting for the blistering rainfall to subside, while Ryou carefully touches down, readying his next move. Without warning, the demoness erupts into an inferno, violently blowing apart everything around her. She slowly stalks towards Ryou with murderous intent, but right at that moment, the eclipse begins fading away, and as sunlight brushes against her blade, it shatters into nothingness. She stops abruptly, clicking her tongue in annoyance and remarking bitterly that they'll have to finish this fight another day. Ryou mocks, telling her to hurry up and piss off already. Surprisingly unfazed by his attitude, the demon introduces herself as Leonore and casually asks for his name. He reluctantly responds with Ryou, though he makes it obvious he doesn't give a damn about exchanging any more pleasantries with a demon. Leonore is intrigued by the fact Ryou clearly knows what she is, making her regret screwing around earlier instead of killing him outright. She tells him that someday they'll have their rematch, though it's possible another demon might cross his path first. She warns him not to die to some weakling, because when they meet again, she'll have grown far stronger, and next time she won't hesitate to finish his ass off. Ryou feels a chill down his spine at that thought, but just then, the eclipse completely disappears and in an instant reality returns to normal, leaving no sign of their chaotic battle. Feeling shaken, Ryou decides it's best to just buy his books quickly and get some rest. He heads straight to the bank, cashing in on the hefty stack of coins he earned from selling all those wyvern magic stones. Afterwards, he swings by the dorm hoping to check in with his roommates, but when he realizes they're not around, he's just about to leave when he spots them being cornered and harassed by a group of Dutchbag adventurers. Nils and Ito are cursing the leader, a big jerk named Dan, for cowardly ambushing them while they're still injured. But Dan sneers back that monsters won't give them any pity either when they eventually die in the dungeon. Out of nowhere, Dan's cronies suddenly drop unconscious as Ryou quietly takes them out from behind, calmly telling Dan he's absolutely right, but maybe he should take his own advice sometimes. He casually taunts Dan, asking if he's planning to run now that his buddies have taken a dirt nap. Enraged, Dan blindly charges Ryou, only for him to effortlessly sidestep and smash his sword handle directly into Dan's gut, forcing the bully to puke out what's left of his breakfast. Ryou quickly shifts his attention to healing his injured friends, scolding them lightly about needing to toughen up so no weak-ass punks can catch them off guard again. Still, he decides that right now they all deserve a good break. Together, they hit up the public baths where Ito, the resident priest, heals the nasty wound left by Leonore's wind bullet. As everyone sits soaking in the water, curiosity gets the best of them, and they start bombarding Ryou with questions about who the hell could possibly hurt someone as strong as him. Ryou considers mentioning the demon briefly, but quickly decides against it because for now relaxation is the priority and everything else can wait. Thanks for watching. Subscribe to not miss the next part. The next day, Ammon, Nils, and Ito start diving into the dungeon as a group. While Nils and Ammon battle goblins head-on, Ito stays safely at the back, assisting and patching them up whenever they get hurt. As Nils collects magic stones from the slain goblins, Ito heals Ammon, chatting nervously about how unexpectedly dangerous these goblins turned out to be. Nils quickly suggests they should retreat for now, since pushing any further would be suicide. Ito wholeheartedly agrees, especially since encountering goblin archers on only the 4th floor is seriously bad news. But Ammon stubbornly argues he still wants to hunt a few more monsters and earn extra cash, but Nils sternly reminds him about Abel's advice to never risk their lives over petty gains. Eventually, Ammon caves and they return safely to the surface. Turns out that decisions saved their necks because just a few floors below them, another adventurer group was busy getting wiped out by a terrifyingly strong monster. Back on the surface, Ryou reflects on how Leonore's magic skills were absolutely ridiculous, though he at least matched her in casting speed. He resolves to double down on his strengths and shore up his weaknesses, remembering how yesterday he struggled to keep pace with Leonore's insane movement speed. Though he briefly envies her wind magic, he quickly shakes off jealousy, determined to figure out his own unique solution instead. He decides to test whether using water jets to propel himself would work above ground. After all, it worked pretty well underwater. First, he creates a slippery ice platform in front of himself, then fires off hundreds of small water jets from his back to push himself forward. Unfortunately, all this effort results in him moving about as fast as an elderly grandma crossing the street. Frustrated with the embarrassingly slow result, Ryou sighs, labeling it a work in progress, basically the story of his life. Later, Ryou heads to the library, hoping to learn more about demons and alchemy. Coincidentally, at the same time, Lynn is also studying there, and she's desperately combing through records to see if there's any mention of a spell capable of creating an ice wall sturdy enough to crush golems, but finds absolutely nothing. Lynn smugly concludes that Ryou must be some kind of scam artist tricking Abel, reassuring herself that only the greatest wizard on the continent could pull off magic that powerful. Satisfied with her theory, she puts the book back on the shelf, just as she spots the elf girl Sarah. The two exchange casual greetings and briefly chat before Sarah remembers she's supposed to meet up with someone, so she has to leave. Meanwhile, Ammon and the crew return to the guild, and Nils immediately starts stuttering like an absolute simp when he sees Mina. Ito quickly bonks him on the head, snapping him out of it, and calmly informs Nina they've discovered goblin archers roaming around on the 5th floor, a completely unheard of situation. So they returned immediately to report this alarming news. Nina carefully examines the magic stones as proof, instantly confirming their authenticity, and urgently thanks the group before rushing off to alert the guild master. Guild Master Hugh is not happy at all when he learns about goblins appearing on the 5th floor because those little bastards should only show up deeper than the 10th. He grimly senses this could hint at something far worse brewing underground and instructs Nina to immediately summon every B rank or higher adventuring party available. Magna hesitantly informs him that right now only two top-level groups are still in town, Abel's Crimson Sword and the White Brigade. Soon after, Abel and his teammates make their way to Hugh's office, with Abel visibly irritated at the prospect of working alongside the White Brigade, mostly because he can't stand their leader. The girls in his party bluntly tell him to stop whining like a little wimp, and Abel grudgingly pulls himself together before entering. Unfortunately, the leader of the White Brigade, Phelps, is already inside waiting, and Abel struggles immensely not to show his annoyance. Once everyone takes their seats, Hugh explains the serious situation. Goblins have been found on the 5th floor, and their report is completely reliable. Both Crimson Sword and White Brigade must immediately enter the dungeon and thoroughly investigate for any further signs of a potential monster outbreak. Hugh mentions grimly that the last outbreak was 10 years ago, and although it's too soon, he can't rule out the possibility of another one happening now. He offers each team an advance payment of 100 gold coins, with an additional 200 coins promised after successfully completing the mission. Abel then asks for clarification on whether they're only supposed to investigate. Hugh confirms that investigation is their sole mission, prompting Phelps to question what they're expected to do if they discover an outbreak has already begun. Hugh firmly replies that if an outbreak is indeed underway, they should retreat immediately and report back. The guild will then lock down the dungeon walls and coordinate with the knights to eliminate the threat. He also notes he's already alerted both the local lord and the knights' headquarters to ensure maximum preparedness. Finally, Hugh asks both parties if they accept the mission, and without hesitation they agree. The following morning, Ryou is already up and fully prepared to head out to the Northern Library by the time his roommates start waking up. He explains he's planning to dive deeper into alchemy, mentioning he's heard the Northern Library carries books on more advanced topics. Ito confirms he's heard correctly, adding that adventurers ranked D and above have full access to that library. Ammon excitedly chimes in, mentioning rumors he's heard about forbidden books hidden inside the Northern Library as well. Ryou's eyes light up immediately, but Ito quickly bursts his bubble by clarifying that only adventurers ranked B or higher are allowed to even touch those books. The boys then wish him luck on his quest for knowledge as they prepare themselves for another dungeon dive. Ryou soon reaches the Northern Library and instantly vibes with the calm, scholarly atmosphere. He eagerly begins browsing around for the books he needs, though he realizes asking anyone directly about books on demons would probably cause a scene. However, just as he's climbing the stairs to the first floor, he spots the elf girl Sarah standing there, and he's instantly smitten. Meanwhile, Guildmaster Hugh and the two high-ranked adventurer parties arrive at the dungeon gates. Right as they're about to open the massive doors, Abel suddenly stops Hugh, sensing something horribly wrong. Trusting his gut instinct, he orders Lynn to quickly use her wind magic to scan the first floor for threats. Lynn's face immediately pales because she discovers hundreds of monsters lying in ambush right behind the gate. Panic spreads instantly among the group, confirming beyond any doubt that the great monster outbreak has already begun. Hugh urgently commands everyone to fall back and alert both the knights and the guild. Back at the guild, Nils and the others notice the sudden closure notice posted on the dungeon doors, assuming it must be because of the goblin archers they reported. But just then, a frantic messenger bursts into the guild, loudly announcing that a massive monster outbreak has begun. Every available adventurer must immediately rush to man the walls surrounding the dungeon and fend off the monsters. Meanwhile, Ryou and Sarah have been awkwardly staring at each other throughout this entire chaos, until Sarah finally breaks the silence by saying softly that it seems they meet again. They introduce themselves formally, and Sarah gently asks Ryou if he's searching for anything specific. Ryou almost blurts out he's researching demons, but quickly catches himself, nervously claiming he's interested in alchemy, specifically creating golems. Sarah is clearly impressed by his ambitious goal, remarking how difficult crafting golems actually is, though she informs him regretfully that the library doesn't have books exclusively on that topic. Yet with a friendly smile, Sarah asked him to follow her anyway, because she knew this library like the back of her hand and could guide him toward books that would be helpful. They start chatting casually about books and adventures as they walk, and Sarah reveals that she's actually the sole member of a B-rank adventuring party called Wind. Ryou mentions hearing from a friend that there was only one elf living in the city, and Sarah smiles softly, explaining that elves typically don't mingle with humans, but she's always been a bit of a weirdo. Meanwhile, at the dungeon gates, all the adventurers in the city have gathered along the walls, preparing themselves for battle. Suddenly, the monsters smash through the heavy gate, and Guildmaster Hugh immediately shouts orders, commanding everyone to unleash arrows and magic on the charging goblin horde. A fierce battle erupts, and soon the knights arrive to reinforce the adventurers, quickly stabilizing the situation. But Hugh can't shake a nagging worry because there seem to be far more monsters than during the last outbreak 10 years ago. Elsewhere on the battlefield, Abel's party is running dangerously low on arrows. Just then, Nils rushes up, carrying a large barrel full of arrows, urgently delivering a message from Ryou. Abel's group must face the dungeon's boss monster once the goblin mobs have been dealt with. Soon enough, the majority of goblins lie defeated, and Ryou quickly gives Abel and Phelps the signal to lead their parties into the final battle. They leap down from the walls, Lin swiftly using wind magic to soften their landing. Charging forward, they effortlessly dispatch the remaining goblins and position themselves at the dungeon entrance, waiting anxiously for the boss. Moments later, a goblin general emerges from the shadows and everyone thinks it's finally nearing the end. But their confidence quickly shatters as two more goblin generals step out right behind him. Abel instantly realizes they're actually dealing with a goblin king. He urgently explains they must take down the generals immediately, otherwise they'll get significantly stronger once the king arrives. Abel swiftly assigns targets. He and Phelps will handle one general each, while Lin and Rhea team up against the third. The intense fight against the goblin generals begins. Abel manages to sever his enemy's arms, but just as he's about to finish him off, he spots the massive figure of the Goblin King emerging at the dungeon entrance. Instinctively, Abel yells desperately for everyone to get down. An instant later, a terrifyingly powerful wind slash erupts from the dungeon, instantly cutting down all three goblin generals in a single blow. Everyone stares in shock and dread at the Goblin King's ruthless display of power, but Abel and Phelps know they're the only ones capable of taking this monster down. They immediately team up to launch a joint assault against the Goblin King, but their weapons fail miserably against his thick armor. Thinking fast, Abel dashes directly towards the Goblin King, activating his ghost-like skill to phase through the King's devastating attack. Closing in rapidly, he uses his combat technique to pierce through the King's chest armor, striking his heart, but the hit isn't enough to finish him off completely. As the Goblin King prepares to counterattack, Abel quickly signals Lin to finish it, phasing out of the way just as Lin unleashes her wind spears. The magical attack passes harmlessly through Abel's ghostly form and crashes into the Goblin King, finally killing him. The adventurers breathe a collective sigh of relief, believing they finally won, but none of them realizes this nightmare is far from over, as something even more sinister lurks deeper within the freaking dungeon. Afterward, everyone returns to the guild to mark the win, and when Ryou finally shows up, he has no clue why the place is buzzing. But while the rest of the guild gets to party, the guild master is swamped with paperwork up to his elbows, since he still has to file reports on the great monster's outbreak and process payouts for the adventurers who helped handle it. And on top of that, researchers from the royal capital are bound to roll in sooner or later to collect data on the great monster's outbreak, so he's going to have to handle them too. Down at the party, Abel has just wrapped up explaining what went down with the monster's outbreak while he was in the library when his friends arrive. Lin has been wanting to ask Ryou face-to-face for a while, so she tells him she wants to know whether he can actually raise thick ice walls from a distance. Ryou says yes, and to be precise, he can cast up to roughly 40 meters out. But it took a long time to get the feel for it, so it's not as easy as it looks. Even so, Lin has never heard of anyone working magic at that kind of range, so she asks if it is an original spell, and if it is, what incantation he uses to pull it off. Ryou says he would be happy to show her later, but as for the words, he basically makes them up on the spot, so she can use whatever she likes. Right then, Nils notes that most of the food is already gone, so if Ryou does not hurry, he will end up with nothing to eat. He excuses himself to grab a plate, but Lin is still puzzled by what he meant about just going with the flow on incantations. Abel tells her that Ryou only bothers with incantations because he thinks they sound awesome, but he can cast without saying anything at all, and that sounds even wilder to her than the ice walls. Early the next day, Nils, Ito, and Ammon meet at the guild to look for work, but they are disappointed to find the job board completely empty. Right then, Ryou happens to pass by and he asks what the three of them are doing since they would usually be out working by now. Unluckily, after the monster's outbreak yesterday, the dungeon was shut for inspections, so they will not be able to go there for a bit. They were hoping to pick up a resource gathering job to tide them over, but with all the items dropped during the monster's outbreak, there is not much demand for gathering right now. Regardless of their problems, they ask Ryou what he's up to right now, and he explains that he is actually in the middle of searching for magic copper ore because he needs it to start practicing alchemy in earnest. Ito remembers hearing that magic copper ore is extremely expensive around here, and Ryou says that is correct, adding that the last shop he visited quoted him 50 gold pieces for a single copper piece, a painful price for one unit. The cost does not matter much to Ryou since he is loaded, and he also wants to throw some steady work to his friends, so he asks if they would be willing to gather magic copper ore for him. He adds that he will pay each of them 4 gold coins, whether they find any or not, and if they do bring some back, he will buy it for 25 gold coins. All three are shocked, since that is more money than they have ever earned in their lives, yet Ito still asks if Ryou is really fine paying that much, just to be sure. Ryou explains that if they end up finding the copper, his total outlay is only 37 gold, which is far cheaper than the 50 gold he would spend in town, so the arrangement is a solid bargain for him as well. Once they confirm that Ryou is completely serious about the offer, the three of them hurry off to begin their search right away, but after they leave, Ryou hears a sharp ruckus outside the building, so he heads over to take a look. In the side alley, he finds Dan arguing with a squad of knights who are basically trying to snatch a girl in broad daylight in front of everyone. The girl clearly does not want to go, so when they start driving her away, Dan steps in and shoves the nearest knight to break his grip and pull her free. She is free for the moment, but the bigger problem is that the knights still outnumber Dan 4-1 and they have swords, so there is no realistic way he can beat them. The group's leader moves to teach Dan a lesson for daring to defy a knight, but the instant he steps forward, he stumbles, loses his balance, and goes down hard on the street. Everyone nearby is baffled because there is plainly nothing near the knight's boots or on the ground to trip over. The knight refuses to swallow the humiliation of tripping over himself, so he points a finger and accuses Dan of pulling some trick on him. Anyway, as he tries to stand back up with a frustrated grunt, he trips again and hits the ground a second time. Moments later, Phelps arrives, and the sight of these so-called knights turns his stomach. At first, the knights try to throw their weight around since on paper they outrank adventurers inside the city, but their bluster bounces off Phelps because, while he is an adventurer, he is also a noble. His full name is Phelps Heimlein, and the moment they hear he belongs to the Heimlein house, they realize they have stepped in it. His father, Alexis Heimlein, once commanded the Royal Knights, which means the Heimlein name carries real pull over the order, and Phelps could likely have them dismissed on the spot if he felt like it. And had he been there while they tried to kidnap the girl, he probably would not have hesitated to end them. But right now, what he knows is they were about to swarm Dan, so he calls them a disgrace to knighthood and tells them to clear out before he changes his mind about letting them walk away. After the knights leave, Phelps looks up at Ryou, having caught what he pulled a moment earlier. He had already heard from Abel that Ryou's magic was extraordinary, yet seeing it for himself still amazes him, since he has never watched anyone cast from that far away with that kind of precision. Of course, he has no plan to tell anyone that Ryou is the one who made those royal knights slip, since that would be a headache for Ryou. But he truly appreciates the help because he feels personally responsible for letting such awful men become royal knights. That night, Ryou is having lunch at the tavern when Abel happens to show up. It is rare to see him out without the rest of his group, so Ryou instantly assumes Abel is headed to the red light district after this. Abel freaks out and tells Ryou to stop talking before people overhear him, and with Ryou's sharp deduction, he figures that if Abel does not want folks thinking he would visit the pleasure district, he must already have someone in mind. At first he guesses Lin, but Abel says he is wrong because Lin already has a crush on Warren. With that settled, Ryou concludes the person must be Rhea, and Abel gets even more flustered trying to deny it, but that only seals Ryou's speculation. Leaving Abel's crush to the side, Ryou asks what he's actually doing out alone tonight, so Abel admits he is headed toward the pleasure quarter, just not for the expected reasons. And since Ryou is here, Abel admits he could seriously use his aid. One of the dungeon investigators dispatched to the Lu dungeon is an old buddy of Abel, and the crown assigned royal knights to guard him while he is in town. Problem is, those guards are the same scumbags Ryou spotted earlier, and there have been repeated reports of them committing egregious crimes by hiding behind their shiny armor. Abel heard they were in the pleasure district tonight, and they are bound to cause problems sooner or later, so Abel wants to stop them before anyone gets harmed. On the way, Ryou notices two adventurers talking, but he has met every single adventurer in town by now, and he doesn't recognize either of them. Abel says it isn't unusual for adventurers to come to Loon to explore the dungeon, but the dungeon is closed right now, so it does look suspicious, especially since the pair are dressed head to toe in black and slip away the instant they realize Ryou and Abel are watching. A few turns later, Ryou and Abel deliberately cut down a dark alley, and within moments the shady adventurers spring an ambush. But Ryou already saw it coming, so he drops ice onto their heads and knocks every one of them out cold. Honestly, that was far easier than he expected it to be, but they still don't know what those men were planning, so they are going to have to hand them over to the guards for interrogation. Elsewhere in the pleasure district, Phelps is walking alone when those knights creep up behind him. Their leader is still burning with humiliation over Phelps getting in his way earlier, so he and the others plan to annihilate him. But just as they are about to draw their swords, they all realize they cannot move at all. We then see that the entire scene is a trap laid by Phelps, because now that he knows how rotten this group of knights truly is, he would be a failure of a noble if he let them continue as they are. So he had Shenna tag them with paralytic needles, and with them stuck in place, she calls on her fire magic, reducing their bodies to a freaking ash, leaving only their footprints. By first light, a delegation of researchers from the royal capital reaches the town, And right as the guild master had foreseen, they promptly make trouble for everyone by commandeering the entire day's rations for their inquiry. Besides that, Clive is already insisting that Hugh unseal the dungeon and assign some adventurers as escorts while they conduct the survey. Hugh tells Clive he is out of line since no one knows the dungeon's current condition and it could be genuinely hazardous, but Clive counters that he has been granted absolute authority over the investigation. So Hugh is bound to do as he says. The advisor Harold apologizes to Hugh for Clive's conduct and vows to replace the provisions taken from the town, which Hugh appreciates, yet Clive will not drop his push to reopen the dungeon and go in. In the end, Hugh relents and says he is willing to open the dungeon for Clive, but he states plainly that if anything goes wrong, neither he nor the city of Loon will bear responsibility. Every consequence will land on Clive's shoulders. Clive starts to waver now that he understands he will be the one facing the fallout if something happens, but he cannot retreat after arguing this hard. He accepts Hugh's terms, although they still have to find adventurers to accompany the research team. After a short while, Ryou is heading toward the cafeteria when a girl dashes out and asks if he can show her the way to the Adventurers Guild. Ryou was on his way to eat, but since she badly needed his help, he walked her over to the guild. The girl's name is Natalie Schwarzkopf, and she is here to deliver a letter requesting Abel's party to defend the investigation team inside the dungeon. Ryou is taken aback to learn that a team is going down there when the dungeon is closed, but Abel is sure someone leaned on Hugh to force a reopening. The reason it was closed in the first place goes back decades, when after a monster's outbreak, an A-rank party was sent to investigate and never returned. Even their leader, practically S-rank, vanished without a trace, and if whatever lurks below can erase an S-rank, the guild refused to gamble, so from then on it became policy to seal a dungeon whenever a monster outbreak happened. Riegel finds the tale fascinating, but his stomach is growling, so he says he needs to head out now. After Ryou leaves, Lin asks whether Natalie truly belongs to the Schwarzkopf line, famous for their peerless water magic. Natalie says yes, so Lin asks if she has ever encountered magic that lets a mage raise an ice wall from afar. Natalie replies that she is not even sure a technique like that exists, so Abel explains that, unbelievable as it sounds, Ryou can erect an ice wall at a range of about 40 meters, and on that note, he warns everyone present never to pick a fight with Ryou under any circumstances. And if they ever end up against him, they should surrender on the spot because there is no chance they could defeat him even if they all came at him together. He adds for Natalie that if she needs assistance and cannot find any of them, Ryou is the one she should go to. 3 days pass and Ryou's friends finally return from the job, having secured 2 pieces of magic copper ore. So Ryou hands over a total of 90 gold coins, and they are deeply grateful, since with that much money, they can take a break from work for a while. Meanwhile, in the depths of the dungeon, the investigation team has already reached the 7th floor, but oddly, they have not encountered a single monster yet, so they press onward. Eventually, they come upon a black square set into the wall, and none of them can identify it, having never seen anything like it before. But Clive is thrilled because there's a prime anomaly to study, so he orders the instruments set up at once so they can transmit readings to the surface. And once that is done, the analysis crew, Natalie included, will start combing through the data to pin down the anomaly. But the moment Clive's researchers push the monodensity gauge through the gate, every person there is teleported away instantly, and the surface team loses connection with the entire unit. By the time they grasp the situation, they are standing in the heart of a wide grassy plain, and luckily, none of them appears hurt. Yet they have no sense of where they are at all, and Clive and his research team are nowhere to be seen around them. In another area of the fields, Clive set his team to collecting readings on the environment immediately and as thoroughly as possible, since if his hypothesis holds, the gate has transported all of them to a different site. That implies a serious chance of attack from this moment onward, so everyone must stay alert against unknown threats. Even so, Clive is quietly pleased, believing this will significantly sharpen his understanding of the theory he has long studied, namely that the monsters from the tidal bore came from the 38th floor. As the person who uncovered the teleportation gate, he is confident that a promotion to head of the department awaits him in due course once they return to the surface. That expectation holds only if they survive, since the creatures at this depth do not look inclined to be friendly in the slightest. Up on the surface, Natalie and the rest of the research team are still carefully analyzing what happened to the adventurers when the locator abruptly powers up again. It sends a pulse for only an instant, not long enough to exchange messages or attempt a response. From the brief data burst, it appears the expedition team has somehow landed on the 40th floor of the dungeon against all expectations. That result makes no sense, since by all accounts, a moment earlier, they were on the 10th floor. At that moment, a man named Christopher steps into the tent and introduces himself as a researcher from the College of Magic who has joined this investigation in person to assist. He recognizes that he and Natalie's team are nominal competitors, but he says he must learn whether anything unusual has occurred in the dungeon, and he asks them, despite that, to share whatever they know if possible. Natalie and the others hesitate to disclose information that's sensitive, so Christopher explains that not long ago he was entering the dungeon with the adventurers assigned to the second research expedition. Yet, as he reached the threshold, everyone ahead of him disappeared in an instant, which is why he is determined to learn what became of them. Christopher's account finally confirms what everyone feared. The group of adventurers trapped in the depths of the dungeon didn't vanish by accident. They were warped through some kind of teleportation, which explains why they were suddenly stranded on the 40th level. But that doesn't exactly make things any less terrifying. Up until now, the deepest any explorer has gone was the 38th floor, and even that was considered nearly suicidal for most B-class squads. Expecting C and D-ranked teams to survive past that is a damn death sentence. Thankfully, Abel's crew was among the first dispatched in the initial wave. That gives them a fighting chance and hopefully enough firepower to keep the others safe. For a while at least. But if a plan to get them out doesn't come together soon, things are going to spiral fast. When Natalie gets word that Abel's whole squad is stuck down there, she immediately recalls what he warned her about before entering the dungeon. Without hesitating, she bolts to the library in hopes of tracking down Ryou for backup. At the guild headquarters, trouble's already boiling over. Nana storms into Ryou's office and reports a serious development. The investigative team that was dispatched vanished the moment they entered the site. No signals, no updates, just complete silence. Dean Christopher is calling for Ryou to come immediately so they can assess the situation. Ryou jumps from his seat without a second thought, telling Nana he's heading out right away. But before leaving, he orders her to keep everything under wraps. The last thing they need is the rest of the adventurers finding out and losing their heads. Meanwhile, deep inside the library, Ryou is busy navigating shelves of dusty tomes, but he's honestly not getting far. He has no clue where the relevant materials are, and without someone to guide him, he's pretty much lost. He silently wishes Sarah was around because she'd definitely know where to start. Lucky for him, she's actually just a few steps away in the next aisle. Ryou perks up immediately and walks over to her, explaining that he's trying to dig up info on eclipses and tidal surges, but has no idea where to find the right archives. Sarah flashes a smile and offers help without hesitation because she knows exactly where those records are kept. Sarah personally suspects a strong correlation between the tidal bore and eclipse events. She remembers that just 2 days before the most recent surge, an eclipse darkened the skies, and historically, that same sequence has happened more times than she can count. Still, Sarah didn't come to that conclusion overnight because it took her ages of digging through old references to piece the pattern together. So naturally, she's curious why Ryou is suddenly so fixated on the subject. But Ryou can't exactly come out and say he clashed with a demon during the last eclipse in the middle of town. So instead, he smoothly pivots the conversation and asks if she happens to know what causes a magic stone's color to shift. Sarah clearly picks up on the dodge, but chooses not to press him. For now, she simply explains that the color of a monster's core reflects its lifespan. The longer it's lived, the darker the hue. Ryou had already learned that somewhere along the way, which only deepens his fascination with the tidal bore. According to the documentation, all the monsters that emerged during the event left behind completely transparent stones. Most believe the creatures surge upward from the lower dungeon levels, but those clear stones suggest they weren't seasoned beasts. They were freshly born. And what shocks him most is that even older tidal bore accounts describe the exact same thing, crystal clear stones every time, and Ryou hadn't expected that kind of consistency in such aged reports. Sarah casually mentions that the records aren't exactly in great condition. Most are stored on fragile parchment, which is probably why no one else even knows they exist. But she does, and if Ryou's interested, she's more than willing to show him where they're kept. Elsewhere, the research team caught in the teleportation trap still hasn't managed to pinpoint where the hell they are. Given how they got here, some are starting to wonder if they're even inside the dungeon anymore. Harold checks in with the engineers, asking if they've managed to reactivate any of their equipment. They tell him the transmitter is finally online, meaning the surface crew should now be able to track their signal. That gives the group a spark of hope because maybe someone's on their way, but Harold doesn't seem convinced. When Abel questions him, Harold admits something feels wrong. It's the air has a weight to it, like being wrapped inside a sanctuary square incantation. That spell was designed as the ultimate defensive enchantment, completely nullifying all magical and physical attacks. If this place shares that same energy signature, then it might mean they're sealed inside an enormous magical barrier, cut off from the rest of the world. The weight of the situation is finally sinking in for Abel, and he quickly tells Lynn to deploy her detection magic to scan the surrounding area. Without delay, Lynn activates her wing-based probing spell, and the results come in fast. There's a large cluster of living beings roughly 500 meters away. Based on the readings, it's about 100 humans, but there are also a dozen unfamiliar life signatures mixed in. And whatever they are, they don't match anything she's ever sensed before. It's suspicious as hell, but it's the only lead they've got, so the team immediately starts moving toward the source. Back above ground, Hu receives the latest update, and it's worse than he feared because the investigation squad wasn't just delayed or lost. They were forcibly warped down to the 40th floor, and Hu can barely process how disastrous this is. Even if he rallied every capable fighter in the entire city, there's no way they'd be able to break through to that depth. Worse yet, no one has a damn clue what triggered the teleportation in the first place. That's why Christopher firmly advises against any rescue attempt. It's just too dangerous right now, and all they can do is wait and hope their team isn't wiped out. Unfortunately, hope isn't worth much at the moment because Clive's unit is under brutal assault. Fiery blasts are raining down on the researchers, and while a few skilled mages manage to throw up protective barriers in time, a lot of their comrades aren't so lucky because some are hit directly, others caught in the crossfire. Clive is still reeling, trying to piece together how things spiraled into chaos this fast. But there's one detail he can't ignore. These attackers resemble the demons he once saw depicted in ancient grimoires. And if those writings were even half right about their strength, then they're in serious trouble. Then a handful of adventurers make a desperate push forward, hoping to flank the creatures, but the attempt ends in horror. They're shredded within seconds, and any survivors are engulfed in flame before they can even react. Soon, Abel's group finally reaches the battlefield, and what they see freezes them in their tracks because the place is an all-out slaughter. Rhea's eyes then lock on the enemy forces, and she instantly identifies them for what they are: demons. She doesn't hesitate to speak up, warning the others that demons are not mere monsters. According to ancient lore, these beings are the sworn foes of deities and celestial beings alike, and if that lore is true, then bringing one down will be anything but easy. Everyone is asking themselves why demons of all things would appear in this kind of place, but Harold quickly shuts down the speculation. There's no time for questions because right now, their priority is pulling Clive's squad out alive. He barks out orders for all the mages to prepare a coordinated strike from both flanks. Just as Clive's exhausted unit is about to be crushed, a hailstorm of conjured spears rips through the three demons, pressing in on them. The spellcasters unleash everything that got: fire, lightning, ice, wind. Every long-range incantation in their arsenal bombards the enemy. The sheer volume of attacks finally cracks through the demons' defenses, buying them a sliver of hope. But the battlefield is still crawling with enemies, so Harold immediately commands the casters to charge up another salvo. The demons retaliate with volleys of fireballs, but the adventurers were ready. Protective wards had already been raised. With their shields holding, the mages prepare to fire again without missing a beat. At the current tempo, Harold actually believes victory might be possible. But the problem is obvious. Mana reserves won't last forever. Once the spellcasters are drained, someone else will have to carry the fight. And Abel knows it too. So he unsheaths his blade, his eyes scanning the chaos until they lock onto a particularly intimidating figure among the enemy ranks. Without hesitation, he signals his squad to advance in a tight line behind Warren, who absorbs the brunt of the flames with his barrier as they dash forward. When they close the distance, Abel tears into the nearest demon, his sword flashing with precision, while Lynn and Rhea provide covering fire, their spells piercing through demonic flesh. The tactic works, and several of the fiends fall quickly, but the pace doesn't last. Lynn collapses, completely drained of energy, and Rhea's supply is almost spent as well, leaving Abel to face the monsters with nothing but his steel. 6 demons remain, and Rhea calls out a grim warning. The towering one ahead isn't ordinary. It's almost certainly a demon prince, the juvenile form of a future demon lord. According to every record, only a chosen hero has ever slain such a being. Not exactly reassuring, but Abel knows retreat isn't an option. Fear gnaws at him, but it isn't as paralyzing as when he once faced the griffin, and that memory steals his resolve. So he charges and manages to cleave through 2 demons in a single stroke. But the victory is short-lived because the demon prince finally takes notice. Its eyes flare with murderous intent as it unleashes a concentrated blast of energy straight at Rhea and Lynn, forcing Warren to hurl himself in front to save them, but the blast knocks the 3 out. The battlefield is stripped down to just Abel and the demon prince, and for a fleeting moment, Abel convinces himself he might stand a chance in single combat. That fragile confidence shatters instantly when the demon prince vanishes in a blur and reappears right in front of him, knocking his blade aside with terrifying ease. Abel steadies his weapon and keeps his composure, but deep down he knows he's completely outclassed because his speed, strength, and skill don't even compare. Then out of nowhere, Clive hammers the demon prince from across the field with a heavy spell, but the attack barely singes the monster. and now the remaining demons redirect their fury toward Clive's unit. Their barriers crumble under the assault, leaving the researchers to be engulfed in fire. The longer this goes on, the more hopeless it looks, so Abel takes his last gamble. As the demon prince lunges, Abel activates his zero-turn technique. With a sharp twist, he deflects its blade and pivots instantly, aiming a deadly slash at its throat. But the prince anticipates the maneuver, sidesteps effortlessly, and hurls him aside like a rag doll. Abel struggles to rise, his body nearly giving out. The demon prince approaches calmly, sword raised high, ready to end him with one swing. At that exact instant, Abel hears the distinct sound of a single droplet of water, and then Ryou smashes through the ceiling above, and Abel can hardly believe his eyes. For a moment, he thinks he must be hallucinating because of all people, Ryou showing up here feels impossible. Ryou then tells him that a lot of people are worried about him and the others, so they should head back as soon as possible, and he'll handle the monsters here for now. Abel immediately tries to warn him, insisting that this isn't just any monster, it's a demon prince, but Ryou doesn't seem fazed at all. In fact, he chuckles, thinking Abel must be exaggerating. After all, he's already fought a true demon before, and this thing doesn't feel nearly as terrifying. If it really is a child version of a demon lord, then its weakness explains everything. As he strides forward, the demons that remain attempt to incinerate him with a barrage of fire, but Ryou answers with a wave of icy lances that cut through their flames, and before they even register what's happening, he uses a water jet cutter from behind them to decapitate them all. The demon prince freezes as it watches the decapitated remains of its subordinates crash at its feet. Rage boils in its eyes, and it knows now that Ryou won't be anything like the easy prey before. Tightening its grip, the prince raises its weapon and prepares to fight for real. And Ryou smirks with anticipation, draws his sword as well, eager to test just how strong this so-called hair of a demon lord really is. Earlier, Natalie had been sprinting all over town in a desperate search for Ryou. And when she finally tracked him down, she breathlessly informed him that Abel and his team were trapped deep inside the dungeon. And the moment Ryou heard that, he wasted no time and encased Natalie in an ice-crafted cart and launched straight toward the dungeon's entrance at full speed. During the ride, Natalie managed to bring Ryou up to speed with all the details of the situation, and by the time they arrived, he had a solid understanding of just how bad things were. He thanked her for reaching out, though one question lingered in his mind. How did she know to look for him in the first place? So Natalie explained that back when they first met, Abel had told her that if anything ever went wrong and he wasn't around to help, she should go find Ryou immediately. According to Abel, Ryou was the most dependable person he knew. That definitely sounded like something Abel would say, and it warmed Ryou's heart to hear how much trust his friend had in him. Still, there wasn't time for sentiment, and he turned and sprinted toward the dungeon gate without hesitation. The adventurers stationed at the entrance tried to block his path, but Ryou had no patience for delays, so he summoned thick walls of ice to trap them behind and made his way inside without slowing down. And as soon as he was inside, he remembered that Natalie had told him the signal came from the 40th floor, but there was no way he could take the long route, not when every second counted. So he cut straight through the floors using high-pressure water blades, which is how he ended up reaching the bottom in record time. Right away, the demon prince lunged in for a strike, but its speed was laughable, nowhere near enough to land a hit on Ryou. With complete ease, Ryou sidestepped the attack and decapitated the creature in one clean sweep. Abel and the rest of his team were stunned because they couldn't believe Ryou had taken down such a powerful enemy so effortlessly. But the fight wasn't over yet, and to everyone's disbelief, the demon prince picked its severed head up from the ground and reattached it like nothing happened. Ryou acknowledged that this regeneration ability could be a minor annoyance, but realistically, the demon prince had no chance of doing any real damage to him. Just to make it crystal clear, Ryou conjured over 200 razor-sharp water jets surrounding the creature from every angle. And before it even had time to comprehend how badly things were about to go, it was already too late because Ryou vaporized the demon prince's body into fine dust, and this time there was nothing left to regenerate. With the battle officially concluded, Abel turns to Ryou and expresses his deep gratitude for the rescue. But Ryou casually brushes it off, saying words are cheap, and if Abel truly wants to thank him, then he can pick up the tab for dinner tonight. Just then, Harold steps forward and introduces himself as a representative from the Bureau of Royal Magicians. He expresses sincere appreciation for Ryou's intervention, saying that without him, they absolutely would have perished down here. But Ryou insists there's no need for thanks because he never turns his back on people in danger. And if anything, he regrets not arriving sooner. Maybe then, the number of casualties could have been minimized. Harold agrees, saying the entire incident is still a tragic loss. He explains that once the mages regain enough energy, they'll begin recovering the fallen so their remains can be properly honored and laid to rest. In the meantime, Abel has a request. and he asks Ryou to help him harvest magic stones from the slain devils because he plans to use the funds to support the families of those who didn't make it. Ryou is happy to assist, but there's something that's been bothering him since he got here. When he dropped down from the 39th floor, he felt like he passed through some kind of magical field. But the moment he took out the demon prince, that sensation vanished completely. And that's not all, because during his descent, he used a detection spell and picked up something unusual coming from the staircase. They plan to check it out before leaving, but for now, their priority is gathering as many devil stones as they can. Even with all his experience, Harold admits this is the first time he's ever actually seen one. There aren't any trustworthy documents describing them either. Since devils tend to appear seemingly out of thin air, some scholars believe they might possess the ability to manipulate space and time, but that theory has yet to be confirmed. Elsewhere in the world, a different scene unfolds. The hero's party has just triggered an ancient altar designed to summon the demon lord. A few seconds later, a swirling portal materializes before them and out steps Leonore. The hero immediately assumes she's the demon lord and calls her that out loud, much to her confusion because last she checked, that wasn't her title. In reality, she just followed a strange energy signature she sensed and decided to check things out. But the moment she hears this guy is a hero, her mood shifts because if he really is a hero, then he must be strong. And if that's the case, then she's absolutely down for a fight. The hero then boldly raises his weapon, declaring with full confidence that today is the day he slays Leonore, and she perks up with excitement, clearly ready for a thrilling duel. But within moments, her anticipation is crushed because this guy is pathetically weak. She barely put any force behind her swing, yet her blade sliced straight through his chest, so the disappointment hits hard. She pulls her sword back and glances at the rest of the party who are frozen in place, visibly horrified and unsure of what to do. Leonore doesn't particularly get a thrill of killing people, so she flashes behind the party's mage and casually suggests they just call it quits and head home. If their so-called hero couldn't last a second against her, then none of them would fare any better. And by the way, they should probably tend to their wounded hero since she didn't hit any major organs, so if they act fast, he might still make it. Thankfully, the party chooses the smart option and immediately scrambles to stabilize their fallen comrade. And while they're busy treating his wounds, Leonore strolls over to inspect the altar. The fight was a total letdown, but she's at least intrigued by the magic gem they used to summon her. It radiates unusual energy, and she considers the trip worthwhile after all. And with a flick of her hand, she teleports the gem into her storage space. From the ground, the hero yells for the demon lord to stop, but Leonore is seriously getting tired of the title. She turns to face them and bluntly says she's not the demon lord. The entire group is stunned because if she's not the demon lord, then how the hell is she that powerful? Leonore doesn't really have a satisfying answer because from her perspective, they're just hilariously underpowered. Still, she gives them a sliver of credit because at their current level, they might be able to beat the real demon lord if they actually coordinated properly. But as for her, she's way beyond that weakling. The hero looks shaken because he can't process the idea that being stronger than the demon lord are out there, so he starts wondering how the hell a regular human like him is supposed to stand a chance against that shit. But Leonore assures him that it's not impossible because in fact she's fought a human once who matched her blow for blow, and she thinks his name was Ryou. That guy was incredible because fighting him had been a real blast. And if she had to assign a power level, she'd say Ryou was about 10,000 times stronger than the hero currently is. With that parting thought, Leonore vanishes in a flash, leaving the hero's party to sit in stunned silence and carry on with whatever was left of their shit day. Meanwhile, back within the depths of the dungeon, Ryou and the rest of the adventurers are making their way toward the staircase to begin their ascent to the surface. Once they reach the spot, Ryou points out the oddity he mentioned earlier, Harold. It appears to be some sort of magical crystal, but Harold has never seen anything quite like it before and can't determine what it's meant to do. Curious, he decides to bring it topside for proper study and slips it into his storage pouch before they resume their trek upward. Eventually, the entire party safely emerges above ground and Hugh begins organizing treatment for the injured adventurers. Meanwhile, Natalie reunites with Abel and the others to make sure they're all in one piece, and Abel personally thanks her for thinking fast, because if she hadn't gone looking for Ryou, they wouldn't have stood a chance. Everything seems to be winding down smoothly now, and Q is clearly relieved that Abel's team made it out alive because if they had perished in the dungeon, the fallout would have been disastrous. That said, Hugh still has something he wants to bring up. He turns toward Ryou and demands an explanation for why he barged past the gate guards and entered the dungeon despite knowing it was off limits. Ryou honestly wasn't expecting Hugh to circle back to that, but he owns up to it and offers a genuine apology for violating protocol. Before Hugh can press the issue further, Harold steps in to defend him, urging Hugh to cut Ryou some slack. After all, if Ryou hadn't taken action when he did, none of them would be alive right now. Hugh is taken aback and asks Harold to elaborate, but Harold suggests they speak privately and invites Hugh to a nearby tent. Once they're alone, Harold explains everything that unfolded below, detailing the encounter with the devils and the appearance of the demon prince, and Hugh listens in stunned silence. The idea that devils are showing up at a time like this is unreal, and the fact that anyone survived is nearly impossible to believe. So he assumes Abel must have done something extraordinary to protect the group. Harold agrees that Abel fought bravely, but even he wasn't able to stand up to the demon prince. In fact, he was seconds away from being killed until Ryou arrived just in time. Hugh was still trying to wrap his head around everything. He'd always known Ryou was gifted, but he never imagined the kid was capable of facing down a demon prince on his own. But Harold quickly corrects him that facing isn't the right word because what Ryou did wasn't a duel, it was a complete massacre. He annihilated the demon prince and its remaining minions in mere seconds, unleashing magic so overwhelming it bordered on horrifying. Then after seeing that firsthand, Harold tells Hugh that their number one priority from this point forward should be making absolutely sure Ryou remains an ally of this nation. Because if someone like him were to turn against them, the consequences would be catastrophic. With that in mind, Harold asks for Hugh's cooperation in redacting all traces of Ryou's power from the official report, because the last thing they need is for some clueless noble to learn about Ryou and start demanding the impossible from him. The next morning, Ryou is wandering through town when a mouth-watering aroma catches his attention. He follows the scent to a cozy eatery known for its legendary curry, and to his surprise, he finds Sarah already seated inside. She's equally shocked to see Ryou, but admits she can't blame him because the food here really is worth the hype. They both place their orders, and since they finally have some time to talk, Sarah asks Ryou where he's been staying. Ryou replies that he's currently living in the guild dorms. That catches her off guard because those rooms are usually reserved for newbies. Ryou explains that he technically is still a rookie, even though he was promoted to D rank right after joining the Adventurer Registry. Sarah raises an eyebrow because instant rank promotions are incredibly rare, but judging by his aura and confidence, it checks out. Once they finish eating, the two step outside. Ryou turns to her and asks why he never sees her around the guild if she's a registered adventurer. Sarah explains that it's a bit complicated. She's been working under a long-standing contract in the royal capital, so she rarely has to check in with the guild at all. She currently serves as a sword instructor for Margrave Loon's Knight Battalion. And since they're already on the topic, she asks Ryou if he has any plans coming up because she'd really love to spar with him sometime for fun. A short while later, Ryou and Sarah stand across from one another in the training arena, moments away from beginning their duel. Before they start, Ryou curiously asks how she even knew he used a sword, especially considering he's a mage. Sarah explains that it was obvious to her from his posture and the way he moved. Besides, it's not all that rare for a spellcaster to mix in physical combat techniques. As the match kicks off, Sarah lunges at Ryou with a burst of blinding speed. He barely manages to react in time and parries her strike. That alone surprises Sarah because almost no one has ever dodged her initial blow on the first attempt. Ryou is equally caught off guard. He wasn't expecting her to be that fast. But as Sarah admits, she was just warming up, but now she's ready to go all in. Ryou does everything he can to keep up as Sarah begins launching rapid, relentless attacks, but her speed and precision are overwhelming. And despite his best efforts, she eventually overpowers him. When the match ends, Sarah throws her arms around Ryou in pure excitement, gushing about how impressed she is. She hadn't realized just how skilled he was, and very few people are able to withstand her onslaught that long, especially considering she was enhancing her movements with wind magic, while Ryou didn't use any spells at all. She'd love to keep sparring, but she has a sword lesson scheduled soon with the Margrave's son, so she has to take off. After saying his goodbyes, Ryou begins walking home. On his way, he bumps into Hugh, who happens to be heading to the guild as well. Hugh invites Ryou to join him, saying there's something important they need to talk about, specifically the dungeon incident where Ryou broke through security and entered unauthorized. Hugh quickly reassures him there's no need to stress because Harold already explained how crucial Ryou's intervention was in saving the investigation team. Hugh is genuinely thankful for that, but that said, the rules are still the rules and some kind of disciplinary action is required. So instead of a formal punishment, he assigns Ryou a task. Ryou is a little puzzled because it sounds more like a favor than a punishment, but Hugh just tells him not to think too hard about it because the assignment is a simple escort mission. Ryou will be accompanying someone on a round trip to the city of Whitnash. A couple of days later, Nils walks up to Ryou inside their dorm and makes a formal request for his assistance. Ryou raises an eyebrow, curious to know what's going on, and Nils explains that his hometown has issued a monster extermination request. He wants to take the mission, but the catch is that it's only available to D-rank adventurers or higher, and unfortunately everyone else in the dorm is E rank or below except for Ryou. Nils practically pleads with Ryou to form a temporary party with him so they can accept the job. Ammon chimes in saying that the enemies they're dealing with are goblins and skeletons, which shouldn't be too dangerous. Ito, on the other hand, finds it strange, noting that goblins and skeletons typically don't share the same territory, but Ryou suddenly cracks a grin because it hits him that he still hasn't fought skeletons since arriving in this world, and the idea actually excites him. He agrees to take the quest just for that experience, and the group heads straight to the guild together. Ryou looks at them seriously and asks if they're sure they want to accept the request, since the village in question is quite far from here. But Nils insists because he wants to go back and protect his people. Ryou then reveals that 2 other groups were already sent on this assignment. The first was an E-rank team, and the second was a D-rank, but both failed to complete the job. This stuns the party because even a D-rank group couldn't finish off goblins and skeletons, but Ryou explains that the real issue wasn't the monsters. The D-rank team reported that the villagers themselves weren't cooperative, which made the mission nearly impossible. Nils finds that odd, since the people in his hometown are usually pretty kind. Ryou decides to greenlight the request anyway, admitting that he understands the struggles of small rural villages since he grew up in one too. Still, he warns that the situation may be more dangerous than it looks and emphasizes that the priest Ito will play a key role as the only one capable of using purification. He also points out that Ryou has a few days left before his upcoming escort duty begins, so they have just enough time to finish this first. The following morning, Ryou and the team begin their journey to the village of Kailadi. Thanks to their recent stamina training, the trip is smooth and quick. When they arrive, the locals immediately welcome Nils back with smiles and warmth. Ryou is quietly surprised because he'd been almost certain that Nils had been kicked out for being a bad boy. Nils gets annoyed at the comment, though we can't deny that it's not entirely false. Soon after, Nils takes the group to meet the village chief Bulin, who lights up when he sees him. After introducing his friends to the chief, the group sits down to finally go over the details of the monster extermination request. Bulin mentions that things might go more smoothly this time around since Nils is familiar with the traditions of the village, but Nils brings up the previous report. He wants to know if it's true that the villagers refused to cooperate with the D-rank adventurers. Bulin then begins recounting the incident from the first time he spotted the skeleton-type monsters. He says that when the E-ranked group showed up, they chased the monsters too deep into the eastern forest, which is considered forbidden land by the villagers. They would have been forced to leave the village anyway, but they ended up injured and pulled back on their own. When the D-rank squad arrived afterward, the trust had already been broken. The locals didn't even want to offer them shelter, and that's why the D-rankers returned with nothing to show for it. Nils completely understands the villagers' behavior, but he knows his companions are confused since they're lacking some crucial context. That context, however, is a closely guarded village secret, and Nils tells them to wait until he gets permission from the village council to explain. At night, the group stays at Nils' family home, where they're greeted warmly by his younger siblings. They start chatting about how Nils always dreamed of becoming an adventurer the moment he came of age, but after their parents passed away, he put that dream on hold to care for his little brother and sister until they could stand on their own. A little while later, Nils returns from his meeting with the council. He tells the group that the council granted him permission to share the village's hidden knowledge with them. He asks them to treat it with confidentiality, then begins explaining the 2 things that make this village unique. The first is the guardian beast that resides deep within the eastern forest, and the moment Ryou hears that, he lights up with excitement. He immediately starts imagining how the beast will probably end up getting possessed by some cursed deity, forcing them into a boss battle, because that's how it usually goes in anime. Nils snaps him out of his delusions and continues. The second secret is about the village shrine. He says that tomorrow the village elder will personally guide them to it. For now, they should rest and prepare for the mission ahead. The following morning, Bulin leads Ryou and the group to the region where the goblins have been sighted. Ito and Ammon discover fresh goblin tracks nearby, and they agree that a nest must be close. Right then, Ryou senses a group of goblins heading toward them, and Nils suggests his strategy. They'll eliminate all but one of them, and let that one run home. That way, they can track it back and wipe out the entire goblin den in one strike. Soon after, the goblins show up at their position, and Ryou quickly responds by freezing them in place using his ice magic. Then the rest of the team wastes no time and dives in to handle the paralyzed enemies, taking them out one by one, while intentionally leaving just one survivor to run back to its den. They trail behind it discreetly and find it chattering with a group of goblins gathered outside a nearby cave. Ryou suggests clearing out the goblins stationed outside first, and without hesitation, he traps them in another wave of ice, giving his teammates a clean opportunity to finish them off. But right after they deal with the smaller group, their next challenge emerges, and it's a freaking goblin general that steps out of the cave. Nils and the others freeze up, clearly shaken by the sight of a high-ranking goblin. But Ryou immediately slams the general into the dirt using a set of ice chains and casually tells Nils to take care of the rest. With Ryou's support, they're able to bring the goblin general down with ease and recover his magic stone before heading back to Keladi. Once they return, the village elder is already waiting for them and smiles when she hears that the goblins have been handled, and she invites them to accompany her to the shrine. On the way, Edo notices an unusual charm dangling from her staff. While Ryou is deep in his own fantasy, imagining a dramatic scenario where the guardian beast is taken over by an evil force and he has to defeat it in a fierce battle. Nils, of course, tells him to stop brewing ridiculous ideas in his twisted little brain. As the group moves deeper into the woods, Edo walks beside the elder and asks her about the pendant she carries. He instantly recognizes it as the emblem of the Earth Mother divinity, and the old woman is pleasantly surprised by his knowledge. Ryou naturally gets curious and asks about the story behind it, so Ito explains that long ago there were 7 divine beings who were once worshipped throughout the land, but over time, all of the churches shifted to honoring only the divinity of light. The elder says that while most of the world forgot the other divinities, their village has remained loyal to the earth divinity for countless generations. She also mentions that she's capable of healing magic too, but unlike modern priests who require chants and incantations, her form of magic doesn't need any of that. Eventually, they reach the mouth of the guardian beast's cave, and the elder calls out to him. She announces that she has brought Nils and his adventurer companions, who seek the beast's approval to take on the mission. Ryou can hardly contain his excitement, eager to see what kind of fearsome creature is about to emerge. Then a massive wolf with the ability to speak steps out of the shadows, and Ryou is frustrated because the beast doesn't look cursed or dangerous at all, so no epic boss fight for him. The wolf scans the group and his eyes pause the moment they land on Ryou. He introduces himself as Mkuzen, then he asks for Ryou's name, which totally stuns both Granny and Bulin, since the guardian beast has never once shared his name with anyone before. Mkuzen calmly explains that his name tends to be a bit much for humans to pronounce, so he usually doesn't bother sharing it. But with Ryou, he felt compelled to make an exception. He explains that he's distantly related to the fairy tribes, and something about Ryou's aura feels naturally comforting to him. This leaves Ryou puzzled, but it also makes him think back to how fond the fairy king was of him too, so maybe there really is something unusual about him that draws fairies in. Either way, he thanks the great wolf for his kind words, and Mkuzen lets out a hearty laugh, telling the elder that she's brought him a rather special visitor this time. With introductions out of the way, Mkuzen begins explaining the details of the quest. There are around 30 skeletons sealed inside the shrine, including their leader, and he's been the one holding them back this whole time. He warns that the boss is significantly stronger than the rest, and they'll need to deal with the lesser undead first before attempting to confront it, and everyone agrees to the approach. Afterward, we see Ito unleashing his light magic, making quick work of the regular skeletons scattered around. Once the path is cleared, Ammon and Nils pull open the shrine gate, revealing a towering skeletal monstrosity sealed within. Ryou instantly enchants their weapons, turning their swords into massive ice-forged hammers, and tells them to focus on dealing physical damage while he keeps the creature off balance. Before the fight begins, Ryou crafts a glowing ice flower high above them, launching it into the sky as a signal to Mkuzen to lift the seal on the gate. Then, as soon as the seal breaks, the boss skeleton charges out of the shrine. Ryou instantly freezes the ground beneath it, causing the creature to lose its footing and slip. That gives Ammon and Nils the opening they need to go to town on it with their hammers. Every time the boss tries to recover, it ends up slipping again, giving them more time to whittle it down. It's a tough battle, but they eventually wear it out and bring it down. With the threat neutralized, the team decides to explore the interior of the shrine. Curiously enough, even the elder herself has never been inside. At the far end of the cave, they find a statue of the earth divinity, holding what appears to be a broken sphere in her hand. The elder suddenly recalls how the previous generation's village elder used to speak of a glowing jewel held by the statue that one day turned pitch black before shattering into pieces. She also remembers Mkuzen mentioning that the shrine had started receiving unfamiliar mana from some distant place. Putting the pieces together, she concludes that whatever this strange energy is, it's likely what gave rise to the monsters. So she decides to place a protective seal on the shrine using her magic to keep the corrupted mana out and prevent more creatures from being born. With the mission completed, the group makes their way back to the town of Loon. On the road, they talk about how nearly 300 days have passed since they first became adventurers, and that means their time in the dorms is almost up. Nils and Ego reveal that they've already started making plans, and they ask Ammon and Ryou to move in with them once they rent a house together. Ammon is immediately all in and agrees without hesitation, but Ryou says he needs some time to think about it, since there are other things he still has to factor into his decision. This was the end of episode 9. Subscribe to not miss the next episode.
Take